Hello and welcome to another episode of SlantCast, the official podcast of Slant Books. My name is Gregory Wolfe. I am Slant's publisher and editor. Thanks for joining us. This evening, we're delighted to be hosting the book launch event for Light in the Canyon by Darren Cools, published today by Slant. Now, I usually begin each episode with a short reflection on some aspect of Slant's mission, but tonight, I want to spin this somewhat differently by pausing simply to share a few brief thoughts about the importance of a literary debut, because tonight, Slant is once again delighted to be celebrating a literary debut. For a highly selective press like Slant, it can be terribly easy to lean toward accepting and publishing established writers. After all, when you're accepting only 1.7% of what is submitted to you, you're more likely than not to be choosing writers who have spent decades honing their craft. But we know that that's a bias we have to take pains to resist. To rely solely on established writers ultimately turns into a self-defeating tendency, because once upon a time, each of those established authors was a debut author, which is why we feel a strong obligation to give writers submitting their first books the closest and most sympathetic reading we can. Now, it is true that in the marketplace, the media machines of the world have made a habit of hyping first novels. But more often than not, that hype is driven by mercenary motives, trying to make a buck by celebrating mere novelty or singling out some reductive element about the author, their politics, their identity, their biography. At Slant, what we look for in first books is something different. On our website, we quote the classic Henry James statement that a great work of literary art has to embody a sense of felt life. When we read the slush pile for debut authors, what we're looking for is that elusive but precious sense of felt life. The recognition that the individual's need to write, to craft an imaginative text, is coming not only from deeply felt human experiences, but also that that urge has been so strong that it has allowed itself to submit to a long, intensive apprenticeship in the pursuit of literary craft. And that's precisely what we encountered when reading Darren Cools' Light in the Canyon, and why we're so delighted to celebrate the culmination of his labors here tonight. Some of you may have heard me joke that the literary debut should become the eighth sacrament of the church. It's a precious moment of both joy and vulnerability. I feel like there should be both incense and, streamers. Maybe we can arrange that at some point. But more seriously, it is worth noting what the novelist Ayanna Mathis wrote in a New York Times piece on her own literary debut. Quote, as the old chestnut goes, a first-time novelist has been writing her first novel all her life. So it is a great privilege for us as a publisher to be able to share this moment with Darren Cools. Here's the bio that Darren shared with us. Darren was homeschooled in Washington State among the vast rolling wheat fields east of the mountains. He spent a lot of time outside on his bicycle and drove combines and grain trucks for the harvest long before he had a driver's license. Always an avid reader, he drew a lot of pictures and wrote stories. In college, he studied classics and philosophy, and later repaired cars for a living. Maybe there's a correlation there, who knows. He moved to Portland, Oregon with his wife, Anna, and they spent a lot of time exploring the Pacific Northwest with their 3 growing children while Darren built a career in graphic design. Still constantly writing, drawing, and dreaming of stories, he took a class on picture books from Victoria Jamerson, author of, among other books, Roller Girl and When Stars Are Scattered, and began assembling the plot of his first novel, Light in the Canyon. Now in Southeast Michigan, Darren is busy with his job, family, fixing up a historic home with Anna, and is a graduate student of social work. The wild, lonely beauty of Washington still haunts his daydreams, and sometimes he still works on old cars. He's completed a number of short stories, is developing several picture books, and is hard at work on a near future solar punk book series about a small band of rebels on bicycles. And we can't wait for that. It is now my great honor and pleasure to ask Darren to read from Light in the Canyon and perhaps field a few questions afterwards. I will ask that if you have questions for Darren, that before he finishes reading, so maybe towards the middle or end of the reading, start typing them into the chat so I've got some lined up to ask him. Again, congratulations to you, Darren, on your literary debut. And maybe to start us off, you can enlighten me. I seem to recall you're saying something about this book starting originally with a journal entry you wrote when you were only 15 years old. Is that true? And now over to you.
Thank you, Greg, for that warm welcome. Um, and the short answer is yes, that is true. I believe it was probably 2018 or 19. I was looking through an old notebook of mine. I tend to keep all of my old notebooks going back till I was a teen. And I encountered a journal entry that was that I had completely forgotten about, which was rather startling. And in this journal entry, I was 15 years old and I was describing a dream I had just awoken from. And in this dream, I had woken up and I was no longer a boy, I was a girl. And the and I laid in bed wondering what I should do in this journal entry. Should I get up and go try to talk to people? Should I hide? Should I run away? I wasn't sure to be ashamed, terrified, excited. I had no idea. And when I read this journal entry, I found myself in my mid to late 30s feeling like there was something really interesting going on in this dream, something really interesting in the way I responded to this dream and what I wrote about it. And that maybe somewhere in there was the seed of a story that should come to light. So, with that, shall I read a little bit from Light in the Canyon?
Yes, please.
I'm going to start us off with the prologue, which is it's not necessarily my absolute favorite part of the book, but it's among my favorite parts of the book, and it's very short. I'll start us off with the prologue. If Jamie had known about Gil's machine before it all began, about what would happen the night of his 13th birthday and in the days following, he might have decided to skip the burger in the library. He definitely should have said no to a walk in the dark. But then he never would have met Haley or the others. He would never have jumped from a moving truck or thrown that table through the third floor window. He would never have found out what it was like to be a girl. People usually say they'll do it all over again if they had the choice, whatever they went through, even if it was difficult and painful, even if it changed the course of their lives, altered their perspective forever, even sometimes when it was heartbreaking. Jamie supposed he agreed, in spite of everything. He wasn't the same as before, never would be again. None of them were. Was this what it felt like to grow up? Still, if he had had any idea at the time what was coming or how hard it would be for all of them, he would have hesitated. The burger wasn't that good, and he never finished reading the book Miss James suggested. If he'd known, he probably would have stayed home that night. He was glad he never had the choice. And now I'm going to read a few excerpts from this book. I'm going to space them out between a few different characters. I don't expect each of these, to make complete sense to a reader who has not been reading consecutively from beginning to end, but I think they make enough sense to be compelling. And I'm just going to drop us in. This is from chapter 2. The front door banged shut behind Jamie Green. He paused, half expecting it to open again. Mom would sigh and tell him to come back inside, say that she was sorry, that she'd make it up to him. The door remained shut. It was already November. Another Halloween had come and gone, and they hadn't done anything at all. No trick or treating, no costumes. Mom had worked late the entire week, including Halloween night. He didn't want to be mad at her. He hated that he depended on her so much. Hated that he was still too young to drive, that planning his own social life was, even now, at nearly 13, scary and difficult. Hated that he expected her to forget that his birthday was in 3 weeks. Light drizzle fell from a gray sky, just enough to dampen the sleeves and shoulders of his jacket. He paused. He passed the shed where the woodpile leaned against the wall under fraying tarps and jumped over the irrigation ditch onto a narrow road. The one-lane gravel track was a lunar surface of puddles. Maybe for starters if we didn't live so far from everything. There was no town or school on Howell Island, only sprawling farms interspersed with a few wild spaces, filled with twisted trees and stinky swamps. The only two paved roads were usually empty except for an occasional tractor or farm truck, and the houses were mostly hidden from each other by windbreaks of poplars, cornfields, now just skeletal yellow stalks, or big blocky haystacks. His family had moved out here 2 years ago with a dream to start a bonsai nursery, but it didn't work out. They were never farmers, even before Dad left. Icy waters seeped into his left sneaker. He sighed and kept walking. Ever since Asher moved out of state for college in August, Jamie had spent a lot of time wandering. The beach at the end of the road had excellent stones for skipping. On still evenings, the water reflected the pale blues and lavenders of the fading sky after the sun had gone. Rings from skipped stones spread, one inside another, in perfect symmetry. Sometimes he followed weedy paths between the fields to stands of tangled trees. Under a roof of rustling leaves, he picked his way over deadfall and decomposing farm equipment, all but lost in the long yellow grass. He wondered if he would ever meet another person out here. Maybe someone his own age. Maybe a girl. Sitting on a high branch under the whispering leaves, reading a book, she'd smile down when he looked up at her. But not in that particular way a girl might smile at a boy. Not like that. He walked on, scuffing at the gravel. Like so many of his things, his shoes were not new. They'd come in a bag of cast-off clothes from one of Mom's friends. It still made his stomach feel light to think they'd once belonged to a teenage girl, the friend's daughter, Julia. Back at the house, his homeschool textbooks lay spread on the kitchen table, today's lessons still incomplete. If he went to school like other kids, he probably wouldn't have stupid daydreams about girls and trees, or feel anything at all about wearing some girl's shoes. He'd be busy with stuff other kids were busy with. A normal kid doing normal stuff. Maybe he'd feel less alone. His hair was wet now. Was the weather out to get him too? He wished he'd remembered a hat. At the T in the road where the gravel ended and cracked pavement stretched flat and straight in both directions was a house with the name Toyota on the mailbox. Were the people who lived there really named Toyota? He had never met them. People moved to the country so they didn't have to talk to the neighbors. But he saw them sometimes. A woman and her daughter. He guessed that's who the younger of the two was. They always seemed to be laughing and teasing, sometimes holding hands or leaning on the other's shoulder. Girls were allowed to be like that. Sweet, silly, affectionate. The opposite of Dad. The car in the driveway was also a Toyota. The shift lever of a manual transmission with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 printed on the knob, visible through the window. When he was 10, he took a field trip on a 747 jumbo jet. It was part of a local school program called Japan Airlines Educational Experience. He still wasn't sure how he and Ash got to be part of it, considering they were homeschooled. There were a lot of other kids on the plane, and some of them seemed nervous. Jamie was so excited he couldn't sit still. Ash sat a few seats away, appearing perfectly calm, but Jamie knew underneath the cool exterior his brother was as thrilled as he was. Jamie talked earnestly with the two young flight attendants as the plane made its brief loop, feeling self-conscious heat creep steadily up his cheeks. They smiled and wrote their names on a napkin, Shimamura and Keiko, and the Japanese words for hello, konnichiwa, and goodbye, sayonara. That napkin was still tucked away between the pages of Bridge to Terabithia, safe at the back of his bookshelf. He felt sure the Toyotas would be classy and sophisticated, just like those flight attendants if he ever met them. Why was he so stupid, so awkward, so different from everyone? He wished he could be more like the Toyotas or the girls on the plane. Confident, comfortable, pretty. Jamie looked back through the drizzle towards home. Warm yellow windows glowed amid puddles, muddy fields, and silent irrigation lines. He wiped his nose on the sleeve of his ragged Sherpa-lined jean jacket. He'd shared the coat with Ash until his brother started caring about clothes in his mid-teens. His was not the only snot on the sleeve. Did everyone's nose resonate in the cold? If I was Shimamura or Keiko, would my nose still drip? Water was in both shoes now. He stirred back the way he'd come. After a few paces, he began to jog, his feet squelching inside Julia's sneakers. I will leave you there and move to chapter 7. Sometime after midnight, Haley awoke from jumbled dreams. Blurry green numbers glowed on her digital clock, but without her glasses, she couldn't make out the exact time. She allowed her eyes to close again. Her dreams had started out as a memory. She was back at Aunt Laura's Halloween party. Little George was disappearing into the crowd. His confusion over her costume had triggered something she couldn't stop and didn't fully understand. She turned away from the music and the food and the laughing people, turned away from the noise and merriment. Everything was too loud and too grim and too much. Before she reached the door, the space around her began to bend and tilt. Sally, the stitched-together girl from The Nightmare Before Christmas, was swelling through the wall and into the room. No one seemed to see her except for Haley. Sally's face was huge and stretched like hot cheese from a slice of pizza when it's lifted from the box. Her eye sockets were empty. She opened her mouth, her jaws spreading wider and wider until the stitches began popping horribly out of her cheeks. Long needle teeth sprouted along her gums. Her growing mouth split the thin white skin of her cheeks all the way to her ears, revealing gaping black nothingness. A black hole. Sally was going to eat her. With a jerk, Haley surfaced once more from the confusion of sleep. One eye shot open. She was coming apart. Bones and muscles broke connection with one another. Her heart sank, squeezing her lungs aside, slipping past her spine. It lay naked beside her on the bed, where it continued to thump out an erratic beat on the bunched, sleep-hot sheets. No. Mom had fallen apart, not Haley. Her heart was where it belonged, in her ribcage, cradled by the rest of her insides. Her arms and legs were still attached. Right? She rolled over and slid into a fresh chaos of dreams. The endless black of outer space rotated beyond the visor of a spacesuit. Beautiful, unknowable, perilous. She was alone, drifting without a ship. There were stars, so many stars, layer beyond infinite layer of white burning points of light. Planets tilted on their axes, galaxies and moons glimmered beyond asteroid belts and speeding comets. The small, pale ball of the sun was somewhere far behind her. It was cold, so cold. Haley. She snapped fully awake. The window near her head was open a few inches. Air moved freely between the yard and her bedroom, seeping slowly out, then spilling back again over the sill like the breath of a huge slumbering creature. It was an unusually warm autumn. The night smelled of fallen leaves and secrets. Across the hall, her father moved, alone in the bed made for two, then was still. The clock in the living room ticked steadily away on the other side of her bedroom wall. Haley sat up. She fumbled for her glasses on the nightstand, then pushed back her quilt and swung her feet over the side of the bed. She moved through the house, barely a whisper on the hardwood floor. The back door made no sound as she slipped outside into the shadows. The grass was damp and cold under her bare toes. She shivered. Here at the far edge of the city, nights were darker than in most neighborhoods. Dad said the hills behind them blocked out most of the light from downtown. Overhead, the sky was thick with stars. The rhythmic thrum of a large boat engine floated up from the river. A tug or container ship from the coast, probably, headed to port. Haley. Tilting her face toward the sky, she listened. Fierce points of white glittered in the depthless tapestry of black. Backyard shadows deepened. The cosmos tugged, and she pitched into something like dreams once more, despite her wide-open eyes and her toes still curling in the chilly grass. And then she was dissolving, alone inside her spacesuit, flying apart behind her gold visor as she spun slowly among the terrible stars. Haley. She couldn't be certain there had been a sound at all, but there was a fresh ache in her chest. A familiar, horrible, wonderful ache. Mom? Her pulse quickened. Is that you? There was no reply. Only silent, infinite space. She was thousands of little pieces inside her spacesuit. I'm not like Sally, Mom. I can't stitch myself together again. I can't. The spacesuit cradled what was left of her, keeping all her shattered parts, not safe exactly, but together. I need you. A car door slammed, and she was abruptly back in her own backyard. She blinked and wrapped her arms around herself, teeth chattering. Her toes were ice. A long, throaty blast from a boat horn sounded from the river. She glanced up just in time to see a meteorite streak across the night sky as it disintegrated in Earth's atmosphere in a blaze of yellow-white. A falling star. Make a wish, Haley, she whispered into the darkness. She wished. Then she went in through the back door and back to bed. All right. Once again, I will leave you hanging and move us to a new chapter. This one is from chapter 9. Night had fallen. Under the glow of the yellow porch light, the three of them slid the ray collector toward the railing. Gil extended the telescoping pole until the wire mesh poked out above the roof. He connected a thick cord from the house to a plug in the back of the riveted box. They watched in silence as he muttered under his breath, and studied the angle of the dish. He made some adjustments. Then he turned to face them. I think it's ready, he said. Haley shivered despite her thick sweater, scarf, and wool beanie. She pushed her glasses back up her nose. What can we expect? Dad asked. When it starts working, I mean. This will sense the rays, which will be invisible, of course, said Gil, indicating the wire dish. It will concentrate them onto the accumulator. He pointed to the angled board that looked like a solar panel. Haley leaned forward, intrigued by the glittering blue patterns just below the surface of the panel. They were beautiful, intense, and maybe just a little frightening. From there, the collected power is sent through the memristor. He tapped the body of the machine. It will then be transferred through this cord into a bank of Prius batteries for storage. Interesting, said Dad, scratching his cheek with a thumb. Will we see or hear anything when it sucks energy from the air? It doesn't suck energy, Gil began. I don't mean that literally, said his brother quickly. Just how will we know it's working? These will glow. Gil traced out one of the dim patterns on the angled panel with an index finger. At least, that's what happened with the prototypes. But the amount of power flowing through this board will be a lot. Dad's face changed. Gil, if this is dangerous, like that stupid hydrogen balloon when we were kids, I'm not sure. Don't worry, said Gil. It's nothing like that. Thank God. I'm using batteries from a car to store the energy. They can handle it. They're huge. The memristor processes the energy intake as memory. That information is used to regulate the flow in real time so we don't overload the system. A look of pride crossed his face. As I said before, I've tested some smaller versions. As long as you're sure, Dad relaxed. I didn't understand a word of that last bit, but I trust you. Haley looked out into the neighborhood, only half listening. Two figures walked together under patterns of light and shadow cast by streetlights. One of them brandished a long stick like a sword. Across the street, a porch light snapped on, and Haley heard the creak of a screen door. A small, dark shape moved in the hedge that separated Gil's yard from the next. She recognized the ringed tail and black eye mask of a raccoon as it paused to glance curiously up at her. Hello, friend, she murmured. Do you want to watch the experiment too? Here we go, said Gil without preamble, and threw a switch. Haley drew in her breath. Uncle Gil's machine began to emit a low hum. It sounded a bit like a microwave or the vibration of high-voltage power lines. Dad took a few steps back. Patterns began to glow on the angled panel, faintly at first, then steadily brightening to a fierce blue light. Haley stared at the buzzing machine. The panel bloomed with small triangles and hexagons. It was mesmerizing. Gil moved around to stand next to his niece. "It's working," he whispered. "Can we tell how much energy is being collected?" said Dad from several feet away. "Is there a gauge or something?" "There's a metering system on," began Gil. From inside the machine came a sound like breaking glass. The pitch of the hum changed. Light from the glowing patterns on the panel rapidly intensified until they were too bright to look at directly. Overhead, the wire dish rattled ominously and turned red, then yellow-orange with heat. Smoke began to rise from the cable connecting the ray collector to the house. This couldn't be right. Sweat prickled across Haley's skin. She turned to her uncle. "What's happening?" Gil opened his mouth, but no sound came out. An explosion of sparks and smoke erupted with a crack from the street behind her. She never had a chance to even turn her head. Blinding blue light stabbed out from the machine's patterned panel directly through Haley's middle, illuminating her from within. She was filled with eerie light, the shadowy outlines of her bones and insides clearly visible. Ribs and bundled intestines, arteries, lumpy organs, her spine. Gil was flung savagely out of sight, like a paper doll blown away in a sudden gust of wind. The scream of a small animal split the air. Haley only got as far as hoping the raccoon hadn't been seriously hurt before she went out like a light bulb. And now, I will read to you from chapter 18. Raina tossed and turned all night. Who had they seen outside the library yesterday? Not OP, that was impossible. The girl was real enough. Calvin had seen her too. Whoever she was, she looked a lot like that boy who came to the library with his mother. Jamie, who had just turned 13 and wanted to read Stephen King. But it couldn't have been Jamie, of course. Jamie wasn't a girl. She slipped in and out of fitful dreams. OP was everywhere. On her porch, curled up in her slouchy reading chair. In Gil's living room by the bookshelf, watching as they worked on the machine. Standing alone on the sidewalk, outside of the Dragon Fuel gas station where they used to buy candy and sodas as children. Just before dawn, she dreamed OP was lying in bed next to her. Her head was bleeding, soaking the pillow. There was so much blood. It seeped through her matted hair, making a small lake on the sheets. It dripped off the mattress onto the floor. Plop, plop, plop. Her friend beckoned. "Come find me, hero." She woke with a jolt, despite the cold night. She didn't sleep again. Eventually she rose and read for a while. Later, she couldn't remember a single word despite all the pages she'd turned. At first light, under a low, cloudy sky, she carried a pot of fresh coffee down to Gil's house. Calvin had arrived a few minutes before. They sat at the kitchen table and savored their hot drinks for a time without speaking. Steam rose in thin light from the window over the sink. "So I called in sick," said Raina. "Today we try to turn Gil's collector into a distributor. Send those cosmic rays back into the void." Calvin nodded, then drained his mug. "I'm off early for Thanksgiving." He looked like he hadn't slept much either. His hair stuck up on one side and his eyes were red around the edges. "It won't even matter unless we find the energy. It could be anywhere. Or nowhere. It might have shot straight out into space. But without the information it supposedly contains, this is all for nothing." "We don't know that for sure," she said gently. "Let's focus on finding your people in this mutated memristor first. Then we'll hunt for the super battery. Supercapacitor. Sorry, you're right." He ran a hand over his stubbly face. "If we can figure out exactly which way that blue light went, even if we don't know how far, we'll have a pretty good idea where to start looking. Then I guess we just start driving." He waved a hand vaguely beyond Raina's house up the river. "I'm on it." She stood up. "Think you can get that machine rewired to suck instead of blow?" "Ha!" He looked up from his empty cup and smiled weakly. "I think I can." "Good. I'll take a look at a map and start working out trajectories. Then I'll help you." The days slowly unwound. Raina found an old paper road map and began marking lines from Gil's porch with a highlighter. Calvin slowly disassembled the ray collector, careful to document everything he did in a notebook. After tracing a narrow fan of possible directions the rays could have gone, assuming they'd resembled a beam of some kind, all the way to the edge of the map, she joined him in the living room. She laid out parts in neat order on the floor as he handed them to her and helped chase references to books and articles scattered throughout the house, as if they were part of an elaborate scavenger hunt. The process was agonizingly slow. Raina stood at the kitchen sink in the late afternoon, holding a glass under the cold stream. Her thoughts drifted to the night before last. She had been about to settle in for a few hours with a good book, unaware Gil's ray collector was about to backfire directly into her, a deadly flashlight beam. She traced the line of energy from his porch to her own, then beyond up the river, north and east, on and into the distance, far from the city. The map lay spread on the table behind her, long yellow lines stretching out from their little street. How far had the blue light traveled? Much of the state in that direction was empty wilderness or rolling fields, an occasional farm, or a tiny, half-forgotten town. And out there somewhere, OP's family home. She could still see the winding two-lane road and the old farmhouse tucked under the shadow of big trees at the bottom of a quiet canyon. The meadow, they called it. She dropped the glass. It thudded against the bottom of the sink, but it didn't break. Raina flew to the living room. Scattered tools and parts were everywhere. Calvin sat in the middle of them, intent over some loose papers, a screwdriver in one hand. Calvin! He looked up, startled. I know where to find them. All right, I'm leaving you again, and we are moving to chapter 26. Calvin let out a long, slow sigh. You saved her life. Raina gazed out over the city as they accelerated up the on-ramp. For a little while. What happened after that? We wrote letters and talked on the phone, and I visited her, just one time. What was she like? They sat on the floor in tank tops and shorts in Ophelia's attic bedroom, a pair of crutches on the floor a few feet away. A hot, dry breeze stirred the curtains at the open window. Late afternoon sun warmed their bare arms and legs, and from somewhere in the tall waving grass outside, a solitary bird sang. That's the loveliest sound in the world, said O.P., tilting her head. Don't you think so? Beautiful, said Raina. What kind of bird is it? Western meadowlark. Her song is my favorite. I love it, said Raina. It's cheerful. Cheerful, but also an invitation. Can you hear it? O.P. whistled an imitation of the flute-like trill of the meadowlark's song. She says, Come, see, look over here. Do you hear it? Raina listened. The meadowlark's clear call winged up to the third-floor window against the background of buzzing insects and the thrum of a lawnmower as O.P.'s dad labored in the heat. I do hear it. Come, see, look over here, like she's calling to us. O.P. grinned. Every time I hear a meadowlark, I feel a stir, right here. She put a hand over her heart. And now her song will make me think of you, too. Why me? Said Raina. She was melting in the glow of O.P.'s smile. Her own heart beat a little faster. Because I had to explain it to you, silly. Admit it, you didn't even know what a meadowlark sounded like until today. They both laughed. Raina fell back onto the rug, arms above her head, giggling, feeling foolish and happy. She had never been more relaxed, more at home, more herself. The odor of fresh mown lawn drifted on the summer air, and she sighed deeply. The meadowlark sang again. Over the following weeks, the new friends exchanged letters and postcards, O.P. complaining of boredom in every single one. At a yard sale, Raina found a book of Western songbirds that included a whole chapter on meadowlarks. Between the pages describing O.P.'s favorite bird, she pressed a pansy, tucking a note in next to the flower. She almost drew a heart after signing her name. Instead, she made a chubby scribble that looked more like a chicken than a noble meadowlark. Oh well, she muttered, unable to suppress a smile as she slipped the book into a padded envelope. 2 weeks later, a small box arrived in the mail. Inside was a tiny green glass dragon wrapped in paper. The note taped to the top of the dragon's head read, Dear Hero, I saw this at a thrift store and it reminded me of that big gas station sign by your library. I know you live nearby, so you must know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I think you're fierce and brave and mysterious, like this good dragon. He'll keep you company until I can see you again. Yours, O.P. In her pocket, pressing against her wrist, was a familiar bump. Even through her corduroys, she could feel that the dragon's shape had changed. He's kept me company all this time, but he's not a substitute for you. And now he's broken. I'm broken. I've been broken since. Calvin cleared his throat. Sorry if it's too much to talk about her right now. It was a long way back to the freeway and morning light and Calvin. So the rate collector was pointing toward her farm, and come find me, hero, Raina interrupted. That's what she said in my dream, as real as if she was right there next to me. Her blood was all over my bed. When I drew out the lines on the map, I saw where they pointed. I knew. Hero? Her nickname for me. Hero from Much Ado About Nothing. Her name was Ophelia. She wanted us both to be from Shakespeare. Calvin ran a hand over his unshaven face and looked away. I'm so sorry, Raina. The fiery rim of the sun broke over the horizon, dazzling their eyes. She flipped the visor down and raised a hand to block the glare. She's calling me. Calling us. We have to go to the meadow, before my arm gets worse, before it's too late for... She drew a breath and went on. I know it as surely as I've ever known anything. Not in any way I can show you or prove, but I know. You understand, don't you? Calvin was silent. Yesterday you said, call it faith. Did you mean it? Everything we're looking for is at that farm. We'll find Haley and Gil, there's no doubt in my mind. And Ophelia? She's dead, Calvin. She's been dead pretty much my whole life, and I'm at peace with that, though I still miss her. But today, she's showing us how to find those who are still with us, still alive. And that's what I have for you today.
Wonderful. So well chosen to give us a range of not only the cast of characters, but some of the real emotional issues and stakes involved in the story. So you didn't give anything away, and important that really wasn't already on the dust jacket. So well done, well chosen. You've already gotten some very kind congratulations here in the chat box. Let me just jump to the first question, though. And that first question comes from Jenny Kwilinski, who says, we are so excited to start reading Light in the Canyon this week as our read aloud. Thank you for our signed copy. Question, how would you describe your writing style in reference to those you know and are inspired by?
That's a great question. Um, I I'm going to go out on a limb because this person I'm going to mention has not too long ago been canceled, and with very good reason in this particular case. But in terms of writing style, I was initially deeply inspired by the prose of Neil Gaiman. His style is somewhat sparse and very conversational, but I always found it deeply compelling. Now, as a human being, it turns out he's actually pretty awful, but I can't say that I don't owe a debt there. Um, I also owe a big debt to the short stories of George Saunders. I feel like his approach to prose is also very compelling, very conversational, and very contemporary, while still um, having something of the classic about it. As someone who reads somewhere between 60 and 80 books a year, it's hard to start putting my finger on too much else, but certainly Virginia Woolf and T.S. Eliot have been influences as well, as was Evelyn Waugh and some other classic writers.
Well, I also love the way that you sort of name drop a few classic young adult books in the story. There was that little bit about Bridge to Terabithia
Yeah.
that you, in the passage that you read, but I think there's at least one or two more spotted throughout. So I certainly felt some kinship with some of those great writers. I mean, in one sense, there's a kind of natural affinity to Madeleine L'Engle with this interest in sort of the relationship between science and the sort of hard science on the one hand, but also mystery and wonder and, in some ways, kind of almost a kind of mystical ecstasy of kind of, that's always elusive, but seems to call to us. So I'm grateful for those shout outs, those call outs that you did.
Indeed. I'll comment very briefly that Julian of Norwich is my favorite mystic, and she's referenced in the book for those who are paying attention. So yes.
I'll hop in here with another question if that's okay. I'll take advantage. I just was wondering, as we're thinking through this book, Greg and I are marketing it, and we're like trying to find the genre, and it's kind of like there's a horror element, there's a fantasy element, there's a sci-fi element. So I was just wondering, what this is similar actually to some of the questions that we've touched on, but like, what world does your book exist in? There's magical elements. Is it our world? Is it kind of like our world? Do you think the world has these capacities that are kind of untapped? I'd just love to hear you speak more to that.
That's a wonderful question, and I'm really glad that you asked it. I'm going to be daring here and say that it is our world. And that and the last part that you hinted at about these untapped realities is exactly what I feel. Now, I realize I grew up in some ways similar to the what's hinted at with Jamie in homeschooled and in distant from town. There were many great experiences, but there were also many experiences that were relatively isolated. And in those spaces, magic and the imagination begin to loom larger than maybe when you're walking down a city street or when you're attending your average school in a town. And for a kid like me who read voraciously and wrote voraciously from my earliest memories, sometimes magic and science and reality got all mixed up. But what I like to remember is that existence is so much bigger than what we perceive through our senses. And so I'm trying to tell a story that I think in some ways can and does exist, but in what way does it exist? That's up to the reader.
Amazing. Amazing. I'll slip in one more question since I've got space in the queue. This is a totally different question. I could just tell there was a lot going on throughout this book with specific songs, specific bands, specific kinds of music. I just love to hear like what do you listen to when you're writing, and what did you sprinkle in there for people to find?
Well, um, I'll start with what I listen to while I'm writing, and that's intensely boring. I turn on lo-fi hip hop as a background to just get me into a space that does not bother me with lyrics, but has a bit of a beat and a movement to it. But in terms of what do I listen to, I mean, I'm a 90s kid, so I listen to all sorts of things. I veer toward shoegaze, for those who know what that is, and odd Scottish bands like Camera Obscura and Bell and Sebastian. Um, what I've sprinkled into the story, into the book itself, are songs and books that have impacted me significantly as an individual. And I would say that again, going back to being a kid that didn't have a lot of friends and did not attend school and didn't have a lot of connection with what one might say was the normal world that most other people experience. There's advantages and disadvantages there, but it did mean that media tended to have an outsized impact on my life, I would say. So certain songs like Queen's Under Pressure, which figures prominently in the end of part one, um, it had a profound impact on me when I was younger. And uh, for those who have seen the music video to The Mother We Share, which is referenced at the very, very end of the book, in the epilogue, as a matter of fact, they'll suddenly see where some certain inspirations of this story came about if you watch that music video.
Hmm.
Darren, I love the way this book takes on some pretty tough things, difficult issues, obviously issues of grief, since that's really foundational to both Haley as a character who's lost her mom, and Raina as a character who has lost her friend Ophelia. But you also work in other things, like I think that profound sense of isolation and uncertainty, almost dislocation that Jamie feels. And when I was first reading your description of the book, and you used kind of elements, you said there were elements of horror in it, which I was really taken aback by at first, but I realized, yeah, some of those dreams are pretty dark. So I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but I think one of the things that I really most admire about this book, and I found really quite moving, is that for all of its willingness to say, this is the real world, and the real world contains some very difficult and painful things. There also is this sense in the book, often just kind of at the margin, that the world itself contains pointers, like signs towards healing, towards, you know, um, reconciliation, towards the possibility of some kind of grace being experienced. So I don't know if you want to leave that as just me throwing out a flowery compliment, or whether it stimulates any thoughts to you, because I think that's, for me, what held the book together emotionally, was the sense that even when things seemed like totally down, there was something moving, moving beyond people's immediate comprehension towards the possibility of something better.
That's a really beautiful comment, and I will say a little about it. So thank you for that. It's related to Emily's question in some ways, in that my journey through life, I feel like it's been impossible for me to deny that there are things stirring beneath the surface, if you will. There are movements beyond our immediate comprehension, at least certainly through our five senses. And whether someone might call it faith or something else, there's more to existence than what we normally give credit to or credence to. In my own life, I've encountered many moments where it felt like there was something moving beyond what I was aware of. And those movements, if you listen, there's a moment at the end of the book where Jamie comments on the tiny whispering sound in his own heart. And I would comment that I have felt the same in my own life. There is a tiny whispering sound, whatever you might attribute it to, that occasionally makes itself known. And if you are willing to listen, there may be lessons there. So I wanted to tap into this idea that notions of relationship, forgiveness, humility were bigger than justice, you might say, bigger than making up for the losses and the failures and the tragedies, and that in the end, there is a sense of hope, even if things don't always work out the way you think they might.
And maybe that's also the lesson for aspiring writers who may, hear this podcast and read your book and look to you as someone that, has made it as a published author, about your story about that journal entry as a 15-year-old, that maybe that was kind of already contained this pointer, this Julian hazelnut, was in that entry. And it's only now that in all this energy and passion and, elbow grease you put into the writing, where you unpacked what that really meant.
Taking a tiny whispering sound and slogging for years to turn it into something bigger than that. Yes, indeed. I agree with you.
And that's the way it works, folks. That's the magic and the sweat, the blood and tears of the writing life. We do have time to squeak one more late breaking question, or I think it's a question here again from Jenny. She says, if you know the work of Ilia DeLeo, who focuses on love and mysticism in reference to the quantum realm, can I ask if you get inspiration for the magic and fantasy from what we are just beginning to understand about quantum physics? Love that one.
Well, Jenny, I can't say I understand much about quantum physics, but I am inspired by real science, absolutely. And I have definitely heard of Ilia Delio. Is that how you say it? Though I'm not sure that I've read any of their work. I I would love my readers to know that the science in my book, including the memristor itself and Tesla's experiment for collecting rays, is very, very close to reality. Of course, I do take a step beyond reality, but it's a relatively small jump from the truth of black holes and what they might theoretically do, according to Stephen Hawking, and the work that University of Michigan is doing around trying to build a real memristor. Of course, I'm mixing up magic and science, but I find real science deeply compelling, and I try to root everything I do as closely as I can in it, because I feel that that really fuels the believability of a story and how it might relate to our own lives, because science is magic.
I was convinced that you'd made that word memristor up, for the first few weeks. And eventually I Googled it, and sure enough, man, you actually are basing it on real stuff. It's crazy. It's fascinating. Darren, thank you so much. I've got an eye on the clock here, so we're going to wrap up now, but we're so grateful that you did follow that inspiration from your 15-year-old self, and for all the hard work and passion you've put into this beautiful and moving book. And we're eager to spread the word to others. And we hope those who are here tonight and who listen into this podcast will spread the word as well, because that's how books are sold. It's called hand selling, even though we also use the phrase word of mouth. So they're both the genius for really getting people excited about books. And I will end by saying I love this line from the book list review of your book, because I think it really captures everything that one would want in a book like this. It says, contemplative storytelling for teens looking for something off the beaten path, which I think is great. And since I know all of us still contain a teen inside of us, I think that applies to all readers. So thank you again, and congratulations again. And now I'm just going to step aside and ask Slant's managing editor, Emily Kwilinski, to wrap things up by sharing a few important final announcements. Emily?
Thanks, Greg, and thank you so much, Darren. This book is so original. That's what I have found myself when I'm telling people about it. I'm like, you've never read a book like this book, so it was really wonderful to dive into it this evening. I just have a few details to share about Light in the Canyon. The book is available for purchase in cloth-bound, paperback, and ebook editions through all major online retailers and directly from Slant. If you go to the book's webpage at slantbooks.org, you can find all those purchase links, and Greg also just dropped one in the chat earlier for your reference. Our next release will take place on July 28th to celebrate Slant's publication of a new poetry collection from celebrated poet Paul Mariani. In this, his 10th and perhaps final book of poems, Paul Mariani, acclaimed poet, biographer, critic, and teacher, reflects on his life, returning in memory to the 1940s and ending some 85 years later with the present. No wonder, then, that so many of the poems strike an elegiac note, some with humor, some with sadness, some with wonder, some with regret, and all asking questions for which there are at best only further questions. Here are poems about growing up in the tenements of New York's East Side, poems about the erosion of his family on Long Island, elegies for those young and old who have passed, and all these years later, along the Connecticut River in western Massachusetts, his home for the past 60 years, poems reflecting on age and frailty as they take their toll, as he turns to faith and family to see himself through another day. In the midst of all this is the collection's central section, a verse drama about growing up in a fractured family back in the 1950s, as finally the poet tries to sing a song for his family, and especially his mother, long gone now, who asked him to sing for her all those years ago, which he has tried to do while the sun sets, and blessedly, there's still time to sing. Don't forget to subscribe to SlantCast through all the major podcast outlets. A video version is also available on our YouTube channel. To follow more of our work, you can subscribe to our Substack, Close Reading, where we publish original writing on the intersection between literature, imagination, and their capacity to form mind and heart, and our email list, Slantwise, where we keep readers up to date on all our latest releases. Finally, remember to tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Thanks again, and see you next time.